Hello, hello. Okay, microphone on now. And this is the stream for tonight. Yes, so please share the stream as I am now live. I always work hard on my content to deliver a consistent stream of high quality information. So please, if you like what I'm doing, you want to see me in higher quality, donate to me. That is Cash App 44100HZ. If you like this work that I'm doing, you want to support my organization, CPI, donate to CPI to help them organize a conference in Chicago. That is in Deerfield, Illinois at the Hyatt Regency on August 6th. And you can donate to their Cash App at CPI Events. This conference will be featuring Garland Nixon, Tara Reid, Dan Kavalik, Nick Brana, Dust James. I won't be presenting, but I will be there. Also, check out our new website. That is maintrendnews.com. That is where CPI's, some members of CPI are going to post news and maybe other guests who are not members. So please check out that website. We also have some new educational content that we just worked on. I didn't work on it personally, but others in CPI did. And this is the educational series on Soviet political economy, which is covering a Soviet textbook. And I'm just going to paste this in chat here. Hi there, Ryan. Hi there, Beyond Liberalism. Thanks for the compliment. I did make that logo myself. And also, if you want to join my growing little community, then here is my Discord right here. So go ahead and join that too. All right. So about today's stream. Normally in the first half of my streams, I cover news and current events, but I have a lot to go over this stream, and I really want it to be high quality. So I'm devoting this entire stream to Juche. Okay. And I will be covering a quite lengthy document summarizing the Juche idea and commenting on it. So the music that you heard in the intro, those were two of many, many patriotic songs from Korea. Koreans have a very serious admiration for music, And specifically, the DPRK has the Revolutionary Frontline Instruments. This is one of their national legends, that they actually made instruments from scratch in order to encourage their soldiers to fight. So they actually made these out of wood and out of anything they could get together, these instruments. And that's a very important part of their history, boosting the morale of the Korean People's Army in the Korean War in 1951. Not particularly the War of Independence, but yeah, 1951. So I want to start out this stream by playing you a video. All right. So let's get this up here. I have my new numpad for switching stream content. I think that's pretty neat. So here we go. So that is a video. I believe it was recently made by the DPRK state, and I think that kind of sums up how they feel about America right now, right? And I think that a lot of people, when they think of North Korea or DPRK, this is what they think of. They think of this as a state that wants to obliterate America, right? They hate America. But today, I actually want to show that that is not true. And actually, this is their response. This is their genuine response to ongoing imperialist aggression against their country, which has led them to feel this way. The Korean War, which obliterated 30% of the Korean people, flattened every city in an attempt to crush their will for independence. Sanctions, which to this day prevent the DPRK from trading with most other countries in order to starve their country and prevent economic development. Continuing joint military exercises performed by the US and South Korea together. The US continues to occupy South Korea, as well as the general demonization and genocidal rhetoric against the DPRK. I know it's not uncommon for people to call for the country to be blown up, obliterated. Even so-called progressives like Bernie Sanders have advocated for preemptive nuclear strikes against the DPRK. So, you know, that this is not something random. You know, that this is something that we caused, that America caused, right? And I want to try to contrast this fear that a lot of Americans have of the DPRK with the actual statements of Kim Il-sung, the inventor of the Juche Idea, right? So I have some documents here. Oops. Yeah, so this is Kim Il-sung on the relations between the DPRK and the USA. So these are highlights from a few different interviews with Kim Il-sung, who was the first leader of revolutionary Korea. So, talk to journalists of the U.S. newspaper, the New York Times. You know, it's interesting that back in 1972, the New York Times would actually talk to the leaders of countries like this. You know, that doesn't happen anymore. But this is what Kim Il-sung said. He said that even after the armistice, the United States continued its unfriendly attitude towards our country. The armistice agreement stipulated that a political conference between the two sides would be held immediately after the war to settle the Korean question by peaceful means. However, the United States did not abide by this stipulation. As a result, our country is still in a state of ceasefire. And guys, Korea is still in a state of ceasefire. The Korean War technically did not end. They are still technically just in a prolonged ceasefire. No peace agreement has been concluded. There has been no progress in the work of solving the Korean question peacefully. Therefore, I always tell our people that the generations are changing, but the target of our struggle remains the same. The U.S. authorities have persisted in their aggressive acts against our country in violation of the armistice agreement. Even after the Pueblo incident, which is, by the way, an incident where I believe a U.S. warship went into Korean waters and was obliterated, the United States continued its aerial reconnaissance of our country, still flying over North Korea. This places, and this was in 1972, this places our country in a perpetual de facto state of war. As this state of war has continued since the ceasefire, we have been forced to increase the development of our defenses and invest heavily in them. To be honest, this enormous expenditure on defense has, to a certain extent, slowed down the rise in living standards of the people. Our people also blame the United States for this. You have just said you hope this abnormal situation between our country and the United States will improve. So do we. We do not want to have many enemies. Now, let me answer the questions you have raised. To begin with, I should like to refer to the question of relations between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the United States. You asked me what positive measures should be taken to end the abnormal state of affairs between Korea and the United States. In our opinion, this is a very simple matter. Relations between our country and the United States depend entirely on the attitude of the U.S. government. If the U.S. government changes its policy towards us, we shall do the same towards the United States. If the U.S. government wants to improve its relations with our country, it must first of all stop interfering in our internal affairs so that Koreans can settle the question of Korean reunification independently. It is nearly 20 years since the armistice agreement was signed, so why should U.S. troops continue to occupy South Korea under the guise of, quote, United Nations forces? Now, the UN actually approved the U.S. to act as United Nations forces, quote unquote, during a time when the Soviet Union was actually boycotting the UN. And they have still used the same rationale for their presence in Korea. Some people say that the U.S. troops are staying on in South Korea to protect it because we might, quote, invade the South. This is a lie. We have declared time and time again that we have no intention of invading the South. It is high time to put an end to the situation where U.S. troops play policemen in South Korea under the cloak of, quote, United Nations forces. The U.S. government disturbs us not only because it has stationed its armed forces in South Korea, but also because it is helping to revive Japanese militarism. We are not happy about the U.S. assistance to the revival of Japanese militarism. We can see from the joint communique of Nixon and Sato of 1969 that the United States is bringing Japanese militarism into South Korea as its agent for aggression against Korea, and it is encouraging it to interfere in our country's internal affairs. Following the publication of the communique, Sato openly declared that he would interfere in Korea's internal affairs. This is another aspect of the unfriendly attitude of the U.S. government towards our country. And guys, before the puppet government, after World War II, Korea had in the north their nationalist government, and in the south, actually, America tried to put the Japanese into power in the south, but there was too much civil unrest. And that's why they brought, I believe, Syngman Rhee, that's why they brought him in to sort of try to stabilize the situation, right? So the United States has always used Japan as a way to subjugate Korea. On the Korean question in the United States, the U.S. government is also taking an unjustifiable attitude towards our country. It advocates inviting South Korea to the United Nations unconditionally while attaching conditions to inviting us. If I remember correctly, North Korea is not part of United Nations still. But I may be wrong about that. It alleges that we do not respect the United Nations Charter, although we have never violated or ignored it. The United States insists that it will only allow us to attend the UN General Assembly if we recognize the unlawful resolutions on the Korean question, which were adopted at the United Nations. How can we go to the UN General Assembly under this condition? Furthermore, the United States has been inciting the, quote, United Nations Commission for the Reunification and Rehabilitation of Korea to give annual reports full of lies and fabrications against our country, thus continuing hostile propaganda against us. Because the U.S. government has unswervingly pursued this unfriendly policy towards our country, there has been no improvement in Korea-U.S. relations, and the reunification of our country has been greatly hindered. If the United States wants to improve its relations with our country, it must stop interfering in our internal affairs so that the Koreans can reunify their country by themselves without its troops disguised as UN forces, and dissolve the United Nations Commission for the Reunification and Rehabilitation of Korea. It must not continue the partition of the Korean nation, but support its reunification. As long as the United States keeps our country divided, our attitude towards the United States will not change. The Korean Peninsula is now cut into two parts. If the US troops withdraw from South Korea and foreign interference stops, the Koreans will be able to find common ground with which will enable them to reunify their country by themselves. Furthermore, if the US troops get out of South Korea, I think the Koreans will come to terms easily, and our people's anti-US feeling will gradually decrease. When U.S. President Nixon looked at the Great Wall during his visit to China, he said that the barriers dividing nations should be pulled down. If the U.S. government wants to put these words into practice, it must begin with Korea. Nowadays, Nixon says that he is trying to improve relations with China as well as with the Soviet Union. Why then should the United States keep its military bases in South Korea? The United States has argued that it keeps them there to prevent communist expansion. Now that it is going to have good relations with the large socialist countries, we consider that there is no excuse for keeping military bases in South Korea. So the United States must quit South Korea at once, dismantling all its military bases and withdrawing its army of aggression. If the United States wants to improve its relations with our country, it must also stop assisting the revival of Japanese militarism and stop introducing it into South Korea. The United States is trying to substitute Japanese militarism for its own invasion of South Korea and to reduce South Korea to a commodity market and appendage of Japan. This is an unfriendly, hostile act against our people. The U.S. government must discontinue such antagonistic acts against our country. If the U.S. government discontinues its hostile acts against our country and stops obstructing our reunification, then there will be no reason why we should be antagonistic to the United States. So we say that relations between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the United States depend not on us, but entirely on the attitude of the U.S. government. We shall keep a close watch on the policy the United States adopts towards our country in the future. The U.S. government should not only improve relations with large countries, but with small countries as well. We do not think improved U.S. relations with large countries will greatly influence its relations with small countries. In fact, the U.S. government has not yet changed its attitude in its relations with small countries. In the joint communique of the People's Republic of China and the United States, the latter declared that it supports the relaxation of tension on the Korean Peninsula and contact between North and South Korea. With regard to the influence the United States will exert on South Korea in this respect, we must wait and see. So you can see here that Kim Il-sung is very optimistic about the outcomes, seeing that the U.S. is making peace with China, and with the USSR. He's very optimistic about the outcomes of this, of the future of his country, and he's calling on the United States. He's calling on us to put our state in a direction of pulling out of South Korea, right? If the United States does not support the relaxation of tension in Korea and North-South contact in the future, it will mean that it gave empty promises under pressure. Our people must remember what Nixon said in China. What interests me most is that he said that no barriers should divide the people of the world. We are watching how he is going to put his words into practice. You asked me if moves such as an exchange of journalists and cultural interchange to promote mutual understanding and reduce tension were possible between the two countries even before the U.S. troops are withdrawn from South Korea. I will answer this briefly. Frankly, we cannot understand why Americans are interested in coming to our country. We do not think our people would bring back anything interesting if they visited the United States in these present circumstances. We do not mean that we want to shut the door to relations with the U.S., but we consider that as long as the fundamental problem between the two countries remained unsolved, an exchange of journalists or cultural interchange would be of little value. So guys, they don't even want to be isolated. They don't even want to be isolated, but they simply do not believe that under the condition of being divided by U.S. imperialism, that it's worth it to maintain relations with the U.S. Since the U.S. government is not changing its hostile policy towards our country, mutual visits had better be limited in scope as at present. We do not think that there is no need at all for our journalists to visit the United States. In our opinion, it is necessary for them to go there in order to let the American people hear our true voice, because at present you only hear the voice of the South Korean rulers. That's still true today. We still welcome visits by American journalists and democratic figures on a limited scale. Such visits and interchange will help promote understanding between the two peoples. And, this is something that's illegal. You cannot go to North Korea unless the US government says that it is in America's interest for you to go to North Korea. Many people who are not prominent enough as journalists, or who the United States simply decided you can't go there, right? There's more here. There's more that I'm going to read. These are a little bit shorter. Answers to questions raised by a delegation of journalists from the Washington Times from the United States. Question. I see that efforts... Oh, and this is 1992, so this is 20 years after the previous interview. Question. I see that efforts have been made recently to improve the relations between North Korea and the United States. Mr. President, what is your view of the present relations between the two countries, and what do you hope will be done to improve the relations between your republic and the United States? Answer. Moves have recently begun to improve the relations between Korea and the United States, and this is attracting the attention of the world. The abnormal relations that have continued until now can be considered, in short, to be related to the Cold War between East and West. It is natural that the matter of improving the abnormal relations has come to the fore with the end of the Cold War. Some people suggest that the end of the Cold War represents the victory of one side over another. This can be considered to be a superficial view of historic change. Since the Cold War was a misguided competition to gain the position of superior power, now that the Cold War itself has been nullified, there can be no question of the victory of one side over the other. Kim Il-sung is describing multipolarity. From the point of view of the development of world history, the end of the Cold War means the nullity of power politics, and this can be viewed as a major precondition for independence to prevail in the world. If one side assumes that it has a monopoly of world power because it has defeated the other side and attempts to maintain and expand the outmoded order of domination and subjugation by means of power politics, it will not only meet the resistance of the peace-loving people of the world, but also be deserted by its partners and ultimately invite its own collapse. On the other hand, if the United States, the only superpower, abandons power politics of its own accord now that the Cold War has ended, and respects and implements the principles of international justice and equality, it will enjoy popular support, and the democratic progress of the international community and the cause of worldwide independence will be speeded up accordingly. If the statesmen who are responsible for the destiny of the United States take a far-sighted view and amend their Korea policy in accordance with the trend of the present times toward independence, a smooth solution will be found to the question of improving Korea-US relations. We hope that the United States will amend its Korea policy without hesitation, make a due contribution to the peaceful reunification of Korea, and moreover, join the historic trend toward worldwide independence. Question. This one is just a diplomatic issue that's mostly forgotten at this point. Finally, in this one, he's talking about the nuclear question, and I think this is an interesting one. This is an excerpt from more questions from the Washington Times 2 years later in 1994, and this was very close to the death of Kim Il-sung. He was very old, but still quite articulate. He might have been 80. He was over 80 at the time answering this. Question. What would it take from your perspective to get relations between the DPRK and the United States back on track, moving towards a peaceful resolution of all issues? Answer. The joint statement agreed upon and published by the DPRK and the United States clarifies the principles of refraining from the threat and use of force, including nuclear weapons, respecting each other's sovereignty, refraining from interfering in each other's affairs, and supporting the peaceful reunification of Korea. Both the DPRK and the United States must adhere to these principles and carry them out in good faith. Then, all the problems arising between the DPRK and the United States could be resolved satisfactorily. Question. One U.S. policy expert recently pointed out that the DPRK had been ignored for nearly half a century by the United States, but this changed with the nuclear issue. Have you found that your nuclear program is an important element in getting the attention of the United States and in being taken seriously by them? Answer. It is well known that the United States has ignored our republic for half a century and pursued a policy against socialism and the DPRK. It is good that after the termination of the Cold War, some far-sighted figures in the United States insist on establishing peaceful relations between the DPRK and the United States. We are not using, as some people claim, the quote nuclear issue as a means to improve our relations with the United States. The relations between countries only improve when they understand each other and reach agreement. They are never improved by the use of artifice by either side. So Kim Il-sung is saying he is against trying to manipulate to get what he wants. And you can tell that he's a very honest man here. Very honest and pragmatic man. Question: what lies between your nation's seeming, quote, on and off again approach to international inspections to which you agreed voluntarily in 1992? Answer: since the very first day when the United States brought nuclear weapons to South Korea, we have striven to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. We acceded to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, to make the United States withdraw nuclear weapons from the South Korea and effect the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Nevertheless, our sincere efforts were disregarded. Instead, attempts were made to violate our sovereignty through inspections, contrary to the principles stipulated in the NPT. Therefore, we were compelled to declare our withdrawal from the NPT as a measure of self-defense. Subsequently, however, as a show of our goodwill, to prove the innocence of our nuclear program, we permitted the requisite inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Certainly, some problems appear to have cropped up during the inspections, but these problems have been raised in the special circumstances where we have suspended temporarily the effectuation of our withdrawal from the NPT. In essence, these are transitional circumstances and will be resolved of their own accord when negotiations over the nuclear issue proceed satisfactorily in the future. So the United States has put nuclear weapons in South Korea, and North Korea developed nuclear weapons as to say, hey, you guys can't blow us up. You know, now we have mutually assured nuclear destruction. South Korea can no longer destroy us. And so it's actually a question of their own sovereignty to have those nuclear weapons. And this is just a thing, right? When Donald Trump went to North Korea, what did he do? He said, if you guys give up your nuclear weapons, then we will lift our sanctions, we'll let you trade freely. Well, first of all, Trump had just pulled out of the JCPOA in Iran, which was the exact same deal. They had agreed not to make nuclear weapons, and then America pulled out of this deal and put sanctions back into place against Iran. So, first of all, DPRK knew better after seeing this JCPOA pull out. And the other thing is that without nuclear weapons, then they're basically sacrificing their own sovereignty just so that they can finally trade with other countries, right? So it's like you're exchanging your own ability to exist for some higher quality of living. You know, if I told you you get $10 million but you die, you wouldn't take $10 million because you're dead, right? It's exactly the same agreement that North Korea refused there. Question. Last month, your foreign ministry announced that your nation may withdraw completely from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because IAEA inspections are unfair. What will it take to resolve the nuclear issue from the DPRK's perspective? Answer. The satisfactory resolution of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula depends entirely on the attitudes of the parties concerned. If one side attempts to exploit the nuclear issue for its selfish goals, or if the international agency, governed by the principles of fairness, adheres to someone's unreasonable demands, the nuclear issue will never be resolved. As mutual understanding between both sides is a precondition for negotiations, it is intolerable that one side makes its demands absolute. The first and foremost principle for setting the nuclear issue is fairness. If fairness is ensured and there is mutual understanding, the nuclear issue will be resolved without difficulty. We have consistently stated that the issue must be resolved through dialogue and negotiations. If the United States adopts a sincere attitude to resolving the issue, it will not be as complicated as has been made out today and can be resolved much more easily than we think. So, you know, this is the truth, guys. This is the truth about North Korea. Question. No doubt you have deeply analyzed U.S. intentions as regards to the DPRK. What is your assessment of the U.S. position towards your nation? What outcome is the U.S. seeking? Answer. Apparently, there are still many people in the United States who have failed to get rid of the concept of confrontation dating back to the Cold War and are not willing to shake off the war psychology of the 50s. They will emphasize the alliance with South Korea, avoid talks with us, and increase the military threat and pressure upon us. I believe that all this is due to such old conceptions. Such sections are resorting to attempts to isolate and stifle our republic. Such a policy, which runs counter to the times, is bound to fail. Question. The United States has announced its intention to deploy Patriot missiles in South Korea. Now, I'm going to gloss over this a bit, right? The United States deployed Patriot missiles in South Korea. Now it's deploying THAAD in South Korea. They have continued to militarize South Korea more and more and more and more. Now, so I'm going to skip that question. And this one... Question. Your nation has declared that the imposition, so your nation, North Korea, the imposition of possible economic sanctions by the United States against North Korea would be considered an act of war. What would the DPRK's response be to such sanctions? How damaging would sanctions be to your economy? These sanctions were applied. Answer. If the United States forces unwarranted pressure like economic sanctions upon our republic through the UN Security Council, we will consider this to be a grave challenge. We will never permit all manner of hostile acts encroaching upon the sovereignty of our country. No military provocations or economic sanctions will bring us to submit or stifle us. So... yeah, there's a few more questions, but I think that the point has been very clearly made about the real relations between the DPRK and the United States. And now I think I want to talk about a few of the accomplishments of the DPRK, right? You know, what is this precious country that they're defending, right? Well, this is a country that has eliminated poverty as a result of inequality. So there's been poverty in the country and starvation, but they have an equal society which raises the people all at once. And without the sanctions imposed on their country, we can see that the people would all be rising all at once, you know. So they've created an equal society. They have universal health care. There is no cash register. There is no money accounting system in their hospitals. There is no asking if you have insurance or anything like this. You go to the hospital in North Korea, they treat you. They treat you and they don't ask for anything. North Korea has free housing. There's no homelessness, right? And this is something we could do in America if everybody got together and decided this is how we could do it. When someone needs a house, they ask the state for a house. And then the state finds them a house that meets their requirements and allows them to live in the house and essentially own the house for themselves. Right? That's something we could do. And when homes are needed, you know, when there's a storm or when there's a flood or something destroys homes, the state simply builds new homes elsewhere and then moves the people to this new location. You know, it doesn't, in America, after a hurricane, we're left with a ton of homeless people, a ton of displaced people who lose their property. Their insurance doesn't give them enough money for a new house, right? And they just become displaced by these floods and hurricanes. Well, that doesn't happen in North Korea, right? And this is a country with much less resources than our own country. They have free higher education. You don't pay for education in North Korea, right? I'd like to get some education statistics up, but I don't have them on me right now. But you can imagine that if higher education is free and leads to higher paying jobs, people will certainly pursue higher education, right? And another accomplishment is that they rebuilt after the Korean War. The Korean War destroyed every city in Korea, the South and the North. It destroyed every single city in Korea. It wiped out 30% of their population. They were pretty much destitute. And now North Korea has houses for everyone. It has, they even have a few luxuries. They rebuilt their country, and they're continuing to rebuild their country. Aside from the famine after 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, they lost a major trade partner who was supporting their country, through equal trade. Suddenly they had nowhere to export their goods and nobody to import lots of food from. So they had a famine post 1991, during which their life expectancy fell quite a bit. That was the arduous March famine, right? But despite this famine, which was imposed by the United States, by the Western powers really, on their country, their life expectancy has grown consistently. They've had economic growth despite their sanctions and despite the isolation. And the only way they can do this is with a socialist system. If North Korea was a capitalist system, then this type of isolation would absolutely destroy their system. It would pretty much become a slave economy, depopulated and destroyed. But because of their socialist system, they're able to withstand these difficult circumstances, right? And North Korea overall is a beacon of independence for the Korean people. This represents the true sovereignty of Koreans in the North. The South is not truly sovereign. It's occupied by the United States. And the North is truly sovereign, right? And also, in order to support their sovereignty, they developed nuclear warheads. They even developed recently hypersonic missiles, which the US doesn't even have working hypersonic missiles, right? And they have a non-first strike policy. So don't think that North Korea is going to attack another country first. It's never going to happen. Their weapons are strictly for defensive purposes, right? But they are so dedicated to their independence and so advanced in their science, despite their isolation, that they have developed this advanced military technology to support their own sovereignty. And another thing that I just wanted to talk about is that, a lot of things, we hear a lot of things about North Korea that make it seem like this weird country, right? Well, it's foreign. You're American. You see a foreign country. Of course, it's going to be weird in its own way, but really, it's not that weird. They have shopping malls. They have water parks. They have smartphones. Yeah, there's people living out in the countryside without too much, but they want to be a normal country. They want to be a normal developed country, right? And eventually, they probably will be, right? So, don't, people need to start treating this country with the dignity that it deserves. I'm tired of seeing the DPRK being treated as, the end of a joke, or people talking about smoking weed in North Korea, or, making fun of their leaders and all of this stuff. I'm tired of seeing it. I'm completely tired of seeing it. This country wants dignity. This country, has suffered a lot and withstood a lot, and it deserves to be treated with the dignity that they have fought for, right? And they've been under tight control for a long time due to the essentially never-ending war, the ongoing siege of their country. But this state of being locked down, this is not the wish of the Korean people. This is not the wish of any people to be isolated and locked down from the world. This is only a consequence of their defiance of the imperialist agenda and the imposed isolation on their country, right? And So some people make a mistake. They think that the Juche idea is based on this isolation and self-reliance or autarky, right? And this idea that North Korea is simply trying to be an entirely self-supporting, self-reliant nation. Well, this is not really true. Self-reliance and independence are some of the core values of the Juche idea, but this is not the center point of the Juche idea, but rather an integration of the Korean people's desire for national independence into a more complete system of thought, right? So this self-reliance is not about isolation. Rather, it's about the independence of the Korean people and the ability to resist imperialism in the age of imperialism, right? Which is ending. They actually wanted to join the IMF and World Bank, but they were denied this because the West would rather have them starve, right? They want to trade with other countries, but they are not allowed to do so. All of this is caused by these sanctions. There's travel restrictions. There's technological restrictions, which limit communication, right? Imposed on this country. And because of this state of siege, it's forced to be secretive, right? It's forced to be secretive as a form of defense, right? As a form of defense. These things are imposed on North Korea. They are not trying to be a secret society holding their people in a cult-like trance, right? They are not this cult state. And this limiting of Korea is still ongoing today, and they are attempting to expand it, right? These brutal sanctions are still in place, still enforced. If a country tries to ship goods to North Korea, the United States may very well physically stop them from doing so, right? And actually, even recently, the Department of Justice extradited a British man who was trying to teach the Koreans about cryptocurrency, which has the potential to help them avoid sanctions. So I'm going to pull that up really quick here. This is on Main Trend News. So a British crypto expert faces extradition from Saudi to the US, but lawyers and academics claim this would be a violation of international law as it impinges on the sovereignty of Britain. Right? So this man, Christopher Ems, right? And you can read the full article on maintrendnews.com. I won't be reading the full article, right? But they alleged that he violated US sanctions by going to the DPRK to teach them about cryptocurrency, which would potentially enable them using crypto as a reserve currency, as a trustless system that doesn't require central banks, using this to avoid sanctions. And now they're trying to get this guy who was trying to free them from their sanctions by teaching them about this technology, right? So this is something that is still going on today. The other misconception that I hear about the Juche idea is that this is sort of like this brainwashing imposed on the Koreans to keep them subservient, right? And it's this sort of cult-like idea that's against independence and freedom and creativity. And it's actually the exact opposite. And I think that many Americans would agree with the core principles of the Juche idea. It is a collectivist idea, but independence and creativity are a massive part of the Juche idea, which runs antithetical to any sort of cult, right? Some people have criticized the Juche idea because it imbues mankind with a sort of positive destiny, right? There's a lot of cynical materialist, so-called Marxists or socialists, right, who see that the purpose of Marxism is to break the chains of capitalism and imperialism, but instead of thinking of a positive destiny, what do we want to achieve by breaking out of these chains? How can we unleash mankind? What is the destiny, right? What is our destiny? Instead, they fixate on these chains, capitalism and imperialism, almost like defeatists, right? And they can't seem to realize that if people are really going to rise up and demand something better, they need to have an idea of what that entails. Maybe not a utopia, but some sort of higher thing to aspire to, some kind of destiny. And that's exactly what Juche offers, and that's exactly why some cynics call it an idealist philosophy, right? But before I read this booklet on Juche, I also want to go a little bit into the Korean War, okay? I know I talked about the relationships between Korea and the USA, but I'm also going to go read you a little bit of William Z. Foster talking about the Korean War. So, that up here. This war in Korea began on June 25th, 1950, was designed to be the initial step in the reconquest of China and the establishment of American domination in Asia, the first general phase of a Third World War. It has been established that the war was started by the Syngman Rhee clique in South Korea. The war had been long in preparation under the supervision of General MacArthur, U.S. military despot in Japan. The South Korean leaders openly... Oh, shoot. Give me a second here, guys. That was not a good scroll bar to click. Where am I now? Jeez. I think it's the next chapter here. Then that's the next chapter. Here we go. Wall Street wants war, the world wants peace. Okay, the Korean War. The South Korean leaders openly boasted that they could wipe out all of the ill-armed North Korean forces in the matter of a few days. John Foster Dulles, now Secretary of State, but then a special agent of the Truman administration, pulled the trigger on the war. He conducted conferences with South Korean leaders, including a frontline trench visit. And on June 18th, only a week before the war began, he declared publicly that, quote, the United States was prepared to give all the moral and material aid that South Korea needed in its fight against communism, unquote. The first reports of the war that came to Tokyo clearly stated that the South Koreans had begun it, an interpretation, however, which was quickly discarded. In 1953, the South Korean representative to the United Nations nonchalantly conceded on a television broadcast that, quote, we started the war. Things turned out radically different in Korea than the Wall Street war makers had planned. The South Koreans, although equipped with the best American arms, had no will to fight, and the North Koreans drove them back pell-mell. In a panic, President Truman on June 27th, without even consulting Congress, autocratically ordered American forces into the war. So the South started the war, they thought they could win it, and the North popped them like a balloon. The South did not represent the will of the Korean people and the strength of the Juche Idea, the strength of the Korean People's Army, not just physically, but spiritually, right? The Korean people wanted independence. The Korean people did not want to fight against the forces for their own national liberation and sovereignty, and fight in favor of the United States and Japanese imposition, right? So the North quickly came in and took almost the entire Korean peninsula. And that's when Truman, he ordered the American reaction, right? The United Nations speedily gave this aggression its blessing and took responsibility for the American war. Truman displayed his chauvinistic contempt for the Asian peoples by calling his Korean military campaign merely a police action. The superior weight of American troops tended to overwhelm the little North Korean army, and when MacArthur went storming north, obviously with China as his goal, this brought in the Chinese volunteers in October 1950 who drove back MacArthur helter-skelter. To break the military stalemate that later developed, both Truman and MacArthur wanted to use the A-bomb. Truman, who had cold-bloodedly ordered the atomic bomb dropped upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki, wanted to repeat this outrage upon the crowded Chinese cities. This was clear from his statements at the time. Insomuch as People's China had a mutual security pact with the Soviet Union, the Truman-MacArthur proposal was tantamount to launching a third world war. But the world outcry against the Truman-MacArthur proposal was so great that the president had to give it up, there being danger otherwise that NATO would fly to pieces. The removal of General MacArthur from his command in Japan was chiefly because of the menace that this firebrand would drop the bomb simply upon his own initiative. Meanwhile, American reactionaries made hay on the basis of the Korean War. President Truman declared a, quote, national emergency. Government war appropriations leaped from $18.5 billion in 1950 to $53 billion in 1953. The developing economic crisis was liquidated by the flood of war orders. Profits soared from 100 to 1,000% in war industries. A fevering building of the armed forces was launched. Peacetime conscription was introduced and air bases were multiplied all over the world until now about 950 encircle the Soviet Union. With a vengeance, monopoly capital reaped maximum profits. The wildest war hysteria was cultivated, witch hunts were organized on all fronts, the Communist Party and many trade unions and other progressive organizations were proscribed and large numbers of their leaders jailed, the people were intimidated by new and menacing forms of thought control, McCarthyism flourished like a bay tree, and the country moved rapidly and dangerously towards fascism. In November of 1952, General Eisenhower was elected president on the basis of his peace demagogy for the American people. Like all others, are opposed to war. But no sooner was he in office than he, like Truman, as a loyal servant of Wall Street, took up the latter's war program where it was left off, except that Eisenhower attempted to apply it even more aggressively. He and his Secretary of State launched the so-called Liberation Policy, which is the Truman Doctrine under another name. It aims to launch civil and colonial wars in the countries opposing Wall Street. Eisenhower and Dulles promulgated, too, their theory of instant massive retaliation, which claimed for the president the right to launch a major war at will without consulting Congress or the people. You know, a lot of people talk about the 2001 Patriot Act as being a major overstep of power. Well, ever since Truman, the executive branch has had this major overstep of power. 2001 only expanded it, but it's been a long time issue. The Eisenhower administration also tried desperately to continue and expand the Korean War, threatening to A-bomb Chinese cities and to inject Chiang Kai-shek's Formosan army into the struggle. But the world demand for peace in Korea was so overwhelming that the Eisenhower government was not able to defy it and had to sign the armistice on July 27, 1953, which it had so long sabotaged in the negotiations. This was a disastrous blow to the whole world imperialist program of Wall Street. Thus, the horrible Korean War was halted. It had cost the United States 142,175 casualties. The real figure was vastly higher, not to mention the huge human losses of the Korean, Chinese, and other people. Millions of Koreans, 30% of the population. It utterly devastated the whole country. In no modern war was there more savage brutality shown, the U.S. forces using germ warfare, unarmed prisoners, indiscriminately bombing unfortified cities and constantly threatening to use the atomic bomb. And I want to remind you that part of the reason why Kim Il-sung was compared to Hitler was to justify the American invasion of Korea. So a big part of the myths that we hear about North Korea are actually based on the desire to overthrow the forces for Korean independence. I mean, how could Kim Il-sung harbor any ethnic chauvinism against his own people? You know, there's no way he could have been a Hitler-like figure. The only chauvinism is America's denying the humanity and dignity of the Korean people. And the Korean Peninsula is of strategic importance, especially for the encirclement of China. It was reduced to just that in the Korean War. The US wanted to totally subjugate Korea for our own aims. Originally, South Korea, the US wanted to reinstate Japanese rule, but that didn't work. And then came the United States Army Military Government in Korea. That is its actual name. The United States Army Military Government in Korea. And though there have been revolts and constitutional reforms, that same state is semi-continuous with the government of South Korea today. The North has always advocated peace, but the South sabotaged this at every turn. And technically, the war never ended. The US retains troop presence in South Korea because without it, Korea would peacefully unify, something the majority of Koreans want. South Korea actually pays $1 billion a year to keep American troops there. So I want to vindicate, by doing all this, I want to vindicate the name of Kim Il-sung and to show the power of the Juche Idea. This is the man who fought for his homeland against Japanese invaders, the man who unified Korea for a short time, whose ideas will eventually win and reunify Korea someday, right? And this was before the reactionary thunder of American bombs destroyed almost everything that he had fought for. Still, the Koreans stood up with the Juche Idea. This man who is undeniably a great shaper of history, far ahead of his time and even ahead of the time of today. He represents the future of Korea, and his Juche ideology represents a bright vision for the future of mankind. Roscoe Dash is saying Kim Il-sung was a great friend to the people of Uganda and Tanzania as well. Absolutely. Kim Il-sung is a great friend of all peoples of the world resisting imperialism. This pamphlet, which I will read today, describes the Juche Idea through a series of questions and answers. This pamphlet is not attributed directly to Kim Il-sung, but it does represent the Juche Idea as upheld by the Korean state. This idea is specifically important for countries which are trying to resist imperialism. For us here in the USA, some of this will be very immediately meaningful, while some of it will be foreign, since we haven't really dealt with foreign occupation except for hundreds of years ago by the British. But I will still read the entire pamphlet so that we can understand the viewpoint of Korea. So I will be right back, and then we will get to reading this pamphlet. 6. What is the fundamental question? Oh, I hope I wasn't muted for too long. 6. What is the fundamental question of philosophy raised by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea puts forward man's position and role in the world as the fundamental question of philosophy. As the origin of the world was explained materialistically by Marxism, the Juche Idea newly raises the relationship between the world and man, the position and role of man in the world, as the fundamental question of philosophy and gives a scientific answer to it. 7. What is the basic principle of the Juche Idea? The basic principle of the Juche Idea is that man is the master of everything and decides everything. All the systems and contents of the Juche Idea are based on the philosophical principle that man is the master of everything and decides everything. 8. What does it mean that man is the master of everything? That man is the master of everything is the principle that refers to the position man takes in the world. It means that he is the master of both the world and his destiny. That man is the master of the world means that he is the dominator and transformer of the world who makes it serve him according to his will and demand, not being subject to the world that surrounds him. That man is the master of his destiny means that he is a being who is responsible for his destiny and shapes it in the way he wants. 9. What does it mean that man decides everything? That man decides everything is the principle that explains the role man plays in transforming the world. It means that he plays a decisive role in transforming the world and carving out his destiny. That man plays a decisive role in transforming the world means that man is a key factor among those that affect the transformation and development of the world. That man is very instrumental in shaping his destiny means that his role is a decisive factor among those that influence his destiny. So, to summarize what we just read, right? Man is the master of the world and decides everything, right? Which means that mankind, we are responsible for our own destiny. We are masters of the world, and we are responsible for our own destiny. 10. What is the relationship between the principles that man is the master of everything and that he decides everything? The principles that man is the master of everything and decides everything are closely interrelated as they define the position of master man takes in the world. They define the position of master that man takes in the world and the decisive role he plays in transforming and developing the world. Man's position in the world as its master is guaranteed by his role in transforming and developing the world, and his decisive role in transforming and developing the world is decided by his position as master of the world. As man is the most developed and powerful being who takes the master's position in the world, he plays a decisive role in transforming and developing the world. As he is a decisive actor in transforming and developing the world, he steadily enhances his position as the master of the world and expands his control of the world. 11. What is the social being clarified by the Juche Idea? In philosophical consideration of man, the Juche Idea starts from the fact that man is a social being. That man is a social being means that he is a being who forms a social group and lives and works in the social relationship. In the Juche Idea, the term social being is an original meaning that defines the intrinsic features of man. So we've gone over how man is the master of the world. He continuously expands his control over the world, continuously expands his mastery over the world. Now, with 11, we're starting to talk about how man is a social being who possesses certain intrinsic properties, right? This is what it means to be a human being. What are the intrinsic features of man defined by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea has newly defined the intrinsic features of man from the point of view that man is a social being. The intrinsic features defined by the Juche Idea are independence, creativity, and consciousness. These are the qualities peculiar to man that no other material beings can have. So remember this: independence, creativity, and consciousness. This is the core of the Juche Idea, that mankind possesses these three attributes. This is important. This will be referenced over and over again. So, let's define these terms. 13. What is independence? Independence is an attribute of a social being who wants to live and develop as master of the world and his destiny. With independence, man opposes all sorts of restrictions and subjugation in nature and society and makes everything serve him. Man does not resign himself to the restrictions of nature and social subjugation, but opposes them. He wants to live free from them and works to this end. He harnesses nature to create conditions for his life and changes natural things and phenomena into means useful for his livelihood. He also transforms society to make it serve the life of the community better. 14. Why is independence the life and soul for man? Independence is the life and soul for man. When independence is referred to as man's life and soul, it means social and political integrity. The physical life is what keeps man alive as a biological organism, whereas the social and political integrity is what keeps him alive as a social being. Right? So independence, we oppose the restrictions of nature. We do not allow ourselves to be subjugated to nature. And this is the life and soul for man. Not just nature, but all things. Independence is the life and soul for man. When independence is referred to as a man's life and soul, it means the social and political integrity. The physical life is what keeps man alive as a biological organism, whereas the social and political integrity is what keeps him alive as a social being. For man, a social being, the social and political integrity is more precious than the physical life. If he is deserted by society and loses political independence, he is like a dead man as a social being, even though he is alive physically. So if we do not possess independence, if we cannot shape our own destiny as human beings, it is as if we are living dead. It is as if we are not even alive, not even human. This is how key it is for human beings to transcend the limitations, right? This is how important it is for us to transcend these limitations. 15. What is creativity? Creativity is an attribute of the social being who transforms the world and shapes his destiny purposefully and consciously. By dint of creativity, man transforms nature and society to make them more useful and beneficial to him by changing the old into the new. Man breeds new varieties of animals and plants, invents new machines and instruments, develops new ideas and knowledge, and establishes a new social system by transforming things and phenomena in the world that surrounds him on the basis of understanding them. New things and happenings come into being by the activities of man, who changes the old into the new. He makes not only quite new things, but what is needed for his life by transforming nature and society on the level he has already reached. In other words, he changes the useless and harmful things in nature and society into the useful and beneficial ones, and makes what is less useful and beneficial more useful and beneficial. Creativity is not the special quality of some individual persons, but a mode of activity peculiar to man, a social being. Now, I think when they say peculiar, they mean, that this is a unique thing to mankind as a social being, to create new things, right? 16. What is consciousness? Consciousness is an attribute of a social being that determines all his activities to understand and reshape the world and his self. By means of consciousness, man understands the world and the law that governs its movement and transforms and develops nature and society in line with his demand. Man conceives the plan of his action through thought before starting cognition and transformation. Conceiving and planning are the first process of all the activities to cognize and transform, and are a key factor that ensures the purposeful cognition and practice. In other words, the cognition and practice of man are the process of conceiving an idea and making a plan and putting them into practice. This shows that all the activities conducted by man are consciously controlled actions. When man encounters a series of problems and situations in the course of cognition and transformation, he neither sits idle nor goes on with what he is doing without proper measures. He copes with them positively and adjusts and controls all his activities so he can achieve the goals of his activities. Your conscious being, you don't leave anything to chance that you don't have to. Your conscious being, you shape things according to your will. That is what having a high level of consciousness means. How are independence, creativity, and consciousness interrelated? Independence, creativity, and consciousness, the intrinsic features of man, are closely related with each other. Independence is a factor that brings into play creativity. Man transforms the world and carves out his destiny purposefully and consciously because he wants to live and develop as the master of the world and his destiny free from the restrictions and subjugation of nature and society. Like restrictions of society, for example, the restrictions imposed by capitalism, right? Or colonialism. Creativity ensures the realization of independence. Man can translate independence into reality as he has creativity. The fuller he gives play to creativity, the better he can put independence into practice. So independence brings into play creativity. Without independence, there is no creativity. And then that creativity is once again used to enhance our independence. Consciousness is a prerequisite for independence and creativity. It ensures the display of independence and creativity. It regulates all the movements and processes of human activities and governs the level and degree of the exhibition of independence and creativity. So consciousness, without consciousness, there is no independence or creativity. Why are independence, creativity, and consciousness called social attributes? Independence, creativity, and consciousness are the social attributes that are formed and developed in the socio-historical course. They are not given to man by nature. They are unthinkable apart from man's highly developed organism, but the organism itself does not produce them. Independence, creativity, and consciousness did not exist in any embryonic form before society came into being. Man could possess them in the course of forming a social community and living in it. They are the requirements and reflection of social life and social practice. They develop constantly as social life and social practice do. So these properties that we have that make us social beings, they were not given to us just by nature. No, they are developed as a part of human society, right? They are requirements and reflection of social life and social practice. So again, we have another mutual relationship here, right? What is the essence of the world defined by the Juche idea, right? So we've gone over, first we went over man's position in the world, right? Then we went over man's intrinsic properties and social characteristics. Now, we're going to talk again about man's position in the world using this new paradigm that we've laid down of man as a social being. So we're kind of going back to the first question. What is the essence of the world defined by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea has a newly provided man-centered outlook on the world. The essence of the world the Juche Idea has expounded is that the world is dominated and transformed by man. 20. What does it mean that the world is dominated by man? That the world is dominated by man means that nature and society are the objects which are in service of translating his demand for independence and interests into reality. Man is a special being who is superior and the most powerful in the world. There is no relation of dominating and being subject to between all the material beings that comprise nature and society, but a simple one of being dependent on and restricting each other. The relationship between man and the surrounding world, however, is not one of being simply dependent on and restricting each other, but that of dominating and being subject to. Right? So, for example, beavers may cut down a tree in order to make a dam, right? So the beavers are dependent on the tree, and they're also restricted by the presence of the tree, right? Or the non-presence of the tree, right? Whereas man plants the tree. We plant the tree. We decide where to build our dam of concrete, right? We consciously control everything. We leave nothing to chance, right? We leave nothing extra to chance. And that is that consciousness, that relationship of how man dominates nature, that is what separates us from animals. That the world is dominated by man does not necessarily mean that all the things and phenomena in the world are actually dominated by man. There are still myriads of things and phenomena in the world that are out of human domination. But more and more of them will be put under human control as the demand for independence and creative ability of man grow with the development of human history. 21. What does it mean that the world is transformed by man? That the world is transformed by man means that the world becomes the object that is transformed and used in line with man's demand by his purposeful and conscious activities. The transformation of the world by man is not the change of the world in general, but the development of the world that man carries out himself in line with his demand for independence and interests. Only man has a creative capacity to transform the world, and the world is transformed and developed into one that serves man only by man's positive action and role. That the world is transformed by man does not mean that all the changes in the world are actually made by man. There are an awful lot of motions and changes of material beings in the world that happen spontaneously free from human action. The scope of man's transformation of the world, however, steadily expands as man develops into a more powerful being and his role is enhanced. 22. What is the law that guides the change and development of the world defined by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea has newly defined the law that guides the change and development of the world with man as the central factor. The Juche Idea defined law guiding the change. The Juche Idea defined law guiding the change and development of the world is that of domination and transformation of the world by man. It means that the world is transformed by man's positive activities in the direction of serving him and in line with the way he develops. So you'll notice there's a bit of open-endedness here. Man's interests, right? Serving man. What do these things mean? This is left as an open end because the Juche Idea is actually meant to be a universal idea, not unique in particular to Korea, though it has aspects which are, but rather as something much more universal, something that defines these intrinsic human characteristics of all human beings. 23. What does it mean that the world is transformed by man's positive activities? It means that the world is developed into the one for man, The world is developed into the one for man by his independent, creative, and conscious activities. This has indicated a factor of the change and development of the world. The world is transformed by man's positive activities, for man is the only transformer of the world. The world does not change into one for man on its own, and any being except man cannot transform the world. Only when man correctly understands and exploits the essence of the world and the law governing its movement and transforms the surrounding world in keeping with his demand, can the world develop into the one for him. This is our world. We are making this the world for human beings, right? 24. What does it mean that the world is transformed in the direction of serving man? It means that the world is transformed in such a way as to serve man's independence better. This has specified the direction of the world's development. If you remember, independence, right? That's our ability to overcome these limitations and restrictions of nature, right? We can go to space now. We can, make more food. We can improve our quality of life in new ways that were previously limited. We can transform the limitations of disease. We can transform, we can transcend these limitations, right? And serve our independence. The reason why the world is transformed in the direction of better serving man's independence is that to realize independence is the basic purpose of human activities, and man's demand for independence continues to grow, right? We have all of this independence, we have all these new things, but we're still hungry for more, right? This hunger never ends, and we always want to enhance our independence. The direction of the world transformation is determined by the aim of activities of man, the only dominator and transformer of the world. At least that we know, right? This is not an alien UFO ideology, Juche. Where the man is on top of the world that we know. The key goal of human activities is just to put independence into reality. So all the human activities to transform the world are conducted in the direction of achieving such a basic purpose. Putting independence into reality. So first, our independence is conceived in the mind. We think this must be possible, right? It must be possible to cure this disease. It must be possible to make this train go faster. It must be possible to go to space. And then we put that independence into reality. And that is what it means to transform the world in serving the direction of man. 25. What does it mean that the world is transformed in the way man develops? It means that the level and tempo of world transformation always keep pace with those of human development. This is referred to the level and speed of the world development. The world changes at pace with that of human development. Human development has been going at an incredibly fast rate in the last centuries, right? Incredibly fast rate. Accelerating. The reason why the world is changed in keeping with human development is that man develops further and enhances his role higher in the process of transforming the world. Right? So we're not just digging with the same shovels that we dug with, say 1,000 years ago. No, now we have diggers, right? We have digging machines. And so the pace of transformation of the world increases with the pace of technology. Man transforms nature and develops society and himself at the same time. We have to develop ourselves in order to develop our mastery of the world. While man's role grows bigger in transforming the world by developing himself, the level of the world transformation gets higher and its speed gets faster. 26. What are the standpoint and attitude towards the world as specified by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea has newly defined the man-centered standpoint and attitude towards the world. The standpoint and attitude the world explained by the Juche Idea have two contents. One is those towards the world that started from the interests of man, and the other is those towards the world development that are based on human activity. right? So not only does our shaping of the world, right, change the world, but the way in which we shape the world shapes us as well. And it has an inherent, nature to itself, right? 27. What does it mean that the world is approached by starting from human interests? It means approaching the world with a view to making the world serve man better. The standpoint and attitude towards the world that stem from human interests are those that analyze, appreciate, and deal with all things and phenomena with human interests as criterion. Man's cognition and transformation of the world are not for their own sake, but are intended to meet his interests. So in all the processes of cognition and practice, a wide range of things and phenomena in the world should not be seen only as objective beings, but be analyzed, appreciated, and dealt with human interests as standard, right? So we don't just look and say, what is that? We say, what is that, and what can we do with it? What can we do with it? And everything we see, we think in this way. What can we do with it? 28. What is the fundamental requirement in approaching the world by starting from human interests? The standpoint and attitude of approaching the world starting from human interests contains two basic requirements. One is that defending man's independent rights and interests in all these activities should be put forward as the supreme principle. And the other is that all the problems arising in cognition and practice should be subordinated to translating man's independent demands and interests into reality. Meaning that the advancement of human civilization, our technology, breaking the chains of capitalism and imperialism, breaking the chains of backwardsness, all of these things, these higher aspirations, going to space, developing fusion power, all of these things are what must be our main guiding motivation. These are the things that must be our main guiding motivation. We should not be hedonists. We should not fall into primitivism and brutality. No. We need to put expressing our independence in the world and making our independence real as our main, if not only, purpose. 29. What does it mean that the development of the world is approached on the basis of human activities? It means approaching the world development from a viewpoint of positive activities of man who transforms the world purposefully and consciously in accordance with his will and demand. The standpoint and attitude of approaching the world development on the basis of human activities are those of viewing the world in the light that the world can develop into one for man only by his positive activities. The world can never be transformed to the benefit of man apart from his positive activities. The world transformation can only be possible by his positive activities. So man's positive activities are very fundamental in viewing the world development, right? This world around us may have had things that we grew to exploit, to hunt animals and to pick fruit and all of this, but it has not shaped itself to be the world of man, the world that serves us. We have shaped it that way through our activity. 30. What is the basic requirement in seeing the world development on the basis of human activities? The standpoint and attitude of seeing the world development on the basis of human activities has two basic requirements. One is that training man to be a more powerful being should be regarded as the first process in all the activities to transform nature and society, and the other is that all the problems arising in cognition and practice should be solved in such a way as to enhance man's creative role. We need to enhance ourselves as human beings. 31. What does the Juche Idea indicate in its socio-historical principle? The socio-historical principle of the Juche Idea defines the essence of society, the driving force of history, the essential characteristics of the socio-historical movement, and the leader's position and role in the socio-historical movement. 32. What is society and what does it consist of? The Juche Idea has shed new light on the essence of society with man as the central figure. Society, in a word, is a community of people. It is a community in which people live with social wealth by forming social relationship. Society, too, is a realm of the world that exists objectively along with nature, but it is a special realm of the world different from nature. The fact that society is a community of people is its fundamental characteristic distinct from nature. Society consists of man, social wealth, and social relationship. 33. Why is man a main component of society? Man is a main component of society. Society was formed along with human emergence. There had been only nature in the world before the birth of man. The appearance of man added society to the world. All the social happenings that are distinct from natural ones are generated by man, and they are detailed expressions of human life and activities. Without man, society can neither exist nor develop, right? Now, I know this sounds kind of obvious, but these principles are building up to greater conclusions, right? And Kim Il-sung, as elucidated and systematized by Kim Jong-il, he is describing, these very fundamental things even taught to children about what it means to be a human being, right? These are things that are very simple, seem very obvious, but they're things that I think people forget. People forget what it means to be a human being. People forget about, the importance of our role in society. They forget that we are the masters of the world, that it is our destiny to shape the world in accordance with our aims, and not hedonism, and not some kind of bestial will to power. No, none of that, right? 34. What is social relationship, and why is it an essential condition for the existence and development of society? Social relationship is the way in which people are connected in social life. People are connected with each other in a form of relationships starting from their demand for shaping their destiny. The connection between people is just social relationship. The reason why social relationship is an essential condition for the existence and development of society is that society, a community of people, can be formed and developed only in social relationship. Only when people live and work with social connection can they form society and develop it by displaying the might of the community. 35. Why is man the master of social wealth? Man is the master of social wealth. It is because social wealth is created by man and serves him. Social wealth is created by man. As a matter of fact, he is restricted by the existing material and spiritual wealth. He can lead a material life as social being when he has means of production and other material wealth. He can also enjoy an ideological and cultural life peculiar to social being when they possess social ideologies, science, and other spiritual assets. All this social wealth is made by man. Without man, no social wealth can be created. 36. Why is man the master of the social relationship? Man is the master of social relationship. It is because social relationship is established and developed by man. Man forges social relationships on his own initiative and transforms them constantly for his existence and development. Of course, social relationship has a great effect on human life and activities. Man, however, does not simply adapt himself to social relationship, but transforms it to satisfy his demand, right? So, we cannot limit ourselves by social relationships. No. We must also transform our own social relationships, right? These social bonds that we have, for example, under capitalism, right? These social bonds, we can inspect them and we can transform them in accordance with our will for independence. We should not submit ourselves to social relationships, right? Exclusively, right? We should not sacrifice the great ideals and goals of mankind towards that which enhances and maximizes sociality, right? 37. What is the driving force of history defined by the Juche Idea? The issue of the driving force of history is the question of the performer who starts and pushes the socio-historical development purposefully and consciously. The Juche Idea has defined that the driving force of history is the popular masses, given a scientific solution to who the driving force of the social historical movement is. That the popular masses are the main agent of history means that they are at the center of history and the social movement is conducted by them. In other words, they are the performers of the socio-historical movement. It is the great masses that are the main shapers of history, right? 38. What are the popular masses? The popular masses are a social group formed with the working people as the core on the basis of commonness of demand for independence and creative activities. So again, the popular masses are a social group formed with the working people as the core on the basis of the commonness of demand for independence and creative activities. So we possess in common, as humans, a demand for independence and creative activities, right? And this common demand for independence meaning, again, to transform the world in accordance with our demands, to transform social relationships like those in capitalism, to break out of imperialism, right? All of these things we have in common. And this creative activities, meaning to enhance our position in the world by creating new things, by revolutionizing the forces of production, right? These things that we have in common, these demands that we have in common, these form a core basis and a commonness of demand for the popular masses. A main component of the popular masses is the working people. They are the classes and strata that substantially contribute to social development through creative activities, right? The workers build the world. In this sense, the popular masses are called the working people. The class composition of the popular masses does not remain unchanged, but changes in the process of socio-historical development. The main criterion for determining whether he or she is a member of the popular masses is not his or her social and class background, but his or her ideology. The ideological basis that integrates people from all walks of life into the popular masses is socialist ideology and the idea of loving the country, the nation, and the people. So Kim Il-sung is putting this very, very clearly, okay? If you want to be part of the popular masses, as they say, you do not need to be a worker, right? But you need to be a socialist, and you need to love your country, your nation, and your people. 39. Why are the popular masses the makers of history? The popular masses are the makers of history because all the socio-historical movements are started and carried out by them. It is them who advocate social development and push it in any area. Motivated by their intrinsic need to live as the master of the world and their destiny free from all sorts of subjugation and restrictions, they start the socio-historical movement to put independence in reality as in all the fields of social life. As they have inexhaustible creative strength, wisdom, talents, and a rich wealth of experience, they can push ahead with the socio-historical movement. 40. What is the independent driving force of history explained by the Juche Idea? If the popular masses are to take the position and play the role as the main agent of history, they should be an independent driving force of history. The independent driving force of history is the popular masses who carve out their destiny independently and creatively. The driving force of history and the independent driving force of history have similarity in that both are the creators of history and performers of historical development, but they are distinguished from each other with regard to whether they shape their destiny independently and creatively or not, right? So the difference is that though the popular masses are the drivers and shapers of history, when the popular masses are subjugated, like in capitalism or feudalism, then they are not the independent driving force of history, but rather they're lying dormant. But when they adopt socialist ideology, when they stand up for themselves and express their independence and creativity, then they become the independent driving force of history. Then they reach their destiny. The popular masses, the main agent of history, develop uninterruptedly along with social historical development and become the independent driving force of history in a certain stage of social historical development. 41. What is an important condition for the popular masses to evolve into the independent driving force of history, right? So maybe we're in this state of subjugation. The masses are in this state of subjugation, right? How do they become the independent driving force of history? The emergence of the progressive working class is an important condition for the popular masses to evolve into the independent driving force of history. The working class is a class that has put forward a high demand of providing complete independence for the popular masses and has a strong revolutionary ability to translate it into reality. You can do this. You can do this. Its demand is to lead an independent and creative life free from all sorts of subordination and restrictions, and its historic mission is to provide complete independence for not only workers, but all other members of society, the popular masses. The working class is endowed with a high sense of collectivism and a strong and respective unity, sense of organization, and revolutionary character. So the popular masses could emerge as the independent driving force of history since the working class appeared in history. 42. What is an essential guarantee for the popular masses to evolve into the independent driving force of history? The popular masses should be integrated into the whole with a revolutionary army as the core and mainstay. This is an essential guarantee for them to evolve into the independent driving force of history. Their struggle to advance history and carve out their destiny is a process of standing face to face with hostile forces, including the reactionary rulers, and a fierce face-off between the revolutionary and counter-revolutionary armed forces. Right? That is why a revolutionary party and people must have the revolutionary armed forces that can destroy the counter-revolutionary violence. Now, this is something that, of course, is a condition of colonialism. Colonized people will never be able to peacefully overthrow the colonialist masters. Never. They must always have an organized force to overthrow them. Only when the popular masses unite with the revolutionary armed forces can they keep their existence, overthrow the outdated state and social system that rely on the counter-revolutionary force, and establish an advanced state and social system and defend it firmly. After all, when they are united as one with the revolutionary army as the core, the popular masses can take the position and play a role as the independent driving force of history. 43. What is the key factor for the popular masses to be the independent driving force of history? The key factor for the popular masses to be the independent driving force of history is the leadership of a prominent leader and revolutionary party. The popular masses are the maker of history, but only when they are led correctly can they hold the position and play a role as the main agent of the historical development. How the popular masses are awakened in a revolutionary way and united into the organized force, and how they take the responsibility and fulfill their mission depend on whether they are led properly or not. Only under the correct leadership of a party and leader can they be the independent driving force of history who shapes history and their destiny independently and creatively. So, Kim Il-sung believes, right, and articulates that having strong leadership and a communist party, right, or the party, as he says here, right, but having a strong leading party is the only way. This is the key, right? This is the key. 44. What is the essential characteristic of the social historical movement explained by the Juche Idea? The Juche Idea has defined the principle that the popular masses are the main agent of social history. On the basis of this, it has delineated the principle that the socio-historical movement is the independent, creative, and conscious movement of the popular masses. This is the essential characteristic of the socio-historical movement defined by the Juche Idea. 45. What does it mean that the socio-historical movement is the independent movement of the popular masses? It means that the socio-historical movement is a movement the popular masses launch by themselves to defend independence and put it into reality. In other words, it is the movement of the popular masses to free themselves from all sorts of subordination and restrictions and live and develop independently as the master of the world and their destiny. Right? The popular masses' position being subjugated is denying their human destiny. It is denying the meaning of what it is to be human. And by doing this, right, part of how they reinforce this is by denying this as the destiny of mankind. They say that you must be just a hedonist, or you must be subjugated, that your destiny is to be a slave or a wage worker, just a cog in the machine. They tell you these things, right? They tell you these things, but this is not the truth, right? The truth is that we want to be free of all subordination and restrictions and live and develop independently as the master of the world and the master of our own destiny. I want to be able to decide my future. We, collectively, as the American people, we want to be able to decide our future. 46. Why is the socio-historical movement called the independent movement of the popular masses? The reason why the socio-historical movement is the independent movement of the popular masses is that they are the independent beings for whom independence is the nature. Right? This is our nature. This is not something that's imposed on us, but rather something that we crave. Something that is not just built into us, but built into us by living in society as well. Right? The popular masses want to live independently and free from all sorts of subjugation and restrictions. Independence is the life and soul for them, and defending it is their vital right not to be deprived of. Like Kim Il-sung said, right, when we do not have our independence, it is like we are living dead. So they do not tolerate their independence to be infringed on or restrained, but fight ceaselessly in all the spheres of social development to defend it and translate it into practice. 47. Why is human history called the history of the struggle of the popular masses for independence? Human history is the history of the popular masses' struggle for independence. The popular masses have struggled consistently throughout human history to free themselves from social subjugation and natural restrictions. The socio-historical movement of the popular masses is conducted in various forms in different historic periods, and its contents vary. Though the socio-historical movement has been conducted in various and complicated forms, it has been a process with a great many events of different characters. All this is intended to defend independence of the popular masses and translate it into reality. Kim Il-sung is saying that the entirety of human history is the struggle for us to realize this independence, to break the chains, and to advance technology and our mastery of the world. 48. In what form is the independent movement of the popular masses conducted? As the movement of the popular masses is a struggle to provide them with conditions for leading an independent life, it is launched in 3 sectors of human activity: transformations of society, nature, and man. Their struggle should be carried out in an all-round way in all the realms of society, nature, and human transformations. 49. Right, so it's breaking down. These are the types of independent movement of the popular masses. The first type, 49. What is the struggle to transform society? The struggle for society transformation is a striving of the popular masses to provide themselves with social and political conditions for leading an independent life free from class and national subjugation. If they are to live and develop independently, they must overthrow the outdated social system which rides roughshod over independence. Only when they replace the old social system with the one that provides them with independence can they become the master of society and their destiny and live independently. Right? 50. What is the struggle for transforming nature? The struggle to transform nature is an endeavor of the popular masses to create material conditions for an independent life free from the restrictions of nature. If they are to live and develop independently, they must work to produce material wealth by harnessing nature. Only when they transform and conquer nature can they free themselves from its restrictions and prepare material conditions for an independent life. So we want to break the chains of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, etc., and we want to transform nature to meet our needs. And the third thing is to transform ourselves. 51. What is the struggle to remold man? It is the struggle of the popular masses to create ideological and cultural conditions for leading an independent life free from the fetters of the outdated ideology and culture. Only when they are free from the shackles of outdated ideology and culture and possess independent ideological consciousness and sound culture can they carve out their destiny by themselves and live and work as genuine, independent beings. 52. Right? How is this all arranged? So the popular masses must transform society, transform nature, and transform ourselves. But what order does this have? 52. What order does the independent movement of the popular masses have? The independent movement of the popular masses is conducted in historical order according to the stage of social development. The primary question arising in their independent movement is the society transformation for translating their socio-political independence into reality. To put their socio-political independence into practice means to make the popular masses the master of state and society, free from all sorts of social fetters. If man is socially subjected and his socio-political independence is infringed upon, he is destined to be a slave with his dignity and value encroached upon. So the question of paramount importance arising from the struggle for independence is to realize social political independence. In socialism, where the society transformation has been carried out, the issue of transforming nature and man comes to the fore and is translated into reality. So, in order to achieve the complete transformation of nature and man, we must first transcend the social bonds, right? We cannot be subject to the social bonds. 53. Why does the struggle of the popular masses for independence assume an international character? The struggle of the popular masses for independence assumes an international character. It means that it is waged on an international scale. In other words, their struggle for independence is a process in which all the countries, nations, and peoples in the world launch the struggle for independence jointly in firm unity. The reason why their struggle for independence has an international character is that the imperialists are allied internationally with the common interests in trampling down their independence, and that the oppressed nations and peoples in the world have similarity in the historic status and interests, right? So it is not just the nation of Korea, it is not just one nation, but it is the whole world that is engaged in this same struggle. Kim Il-sung has defined human nature, and he is defining how it is man's nature to transcend these conditions. 54. What does it mean that the independent stand should be maintained in the revolution and construction? As the social historical movement is the independent movement of the popular masses, the independent stand should be adhered to in the revolution and construction to defend their independence. It means that the popular masses should deal with the problems arising in the revolution and construction according to their own judgment and decision and solve them by their own efforts. So in whatever situation you're in, you have to figure it out for yourself, right? This book is not going to tell you exactly what you have to do. 55. How is the independent stand exhibited? The independent stand is exhibited in exercising the right and taking responsibility as the master of the revolution and construction. That the popular masses exercise this right as the master of the revolution and construction means that they tackle all the problems arising in the revolution and construction according to their own independent judgment and decision and in line with their own interests. That they take responsibility as the master of the revolution and construction means that they take responsibility for all the problems arising in the revolution and construction and resolve them by their own efforts. Use your consciousness. Take things into your own hands, solve your problems, leave nothing to chance. 56. What does it mean that the social historical movement is the creative movement of the popular masses? It means that the social historical movement is the movement through which the popular masses transform and change nature and society actively with their own creative wisdom and efforts. In other words, it is the struggle through which the popular masses do away with all the old things encroaching upon them and restricting independence and develop the new with their creative ability. 57. Why is the social historical movement called the creative movement of the popular masses? It is because the popular masses are the creative beings with creativity as their nature. They want to remove all the old and create the new. We want a new society. We want to revolutionize and innovate. It is in our nature. Their demand comes from their aspiration after independence. We aspire to independence. We aspire to break these chains to transcend our current limitations. They conduct creative activities for transforming nature and society uninterruptedly to achieve their demand for independence. Also, as they have creative ability to transform nature and society, they can successfully launch the creative activities for nature and society transformations. So the socio-historical movement is carried out by the creative activities of the popular masses. 58. Why is human history called the popular masses' history of creation? Human history is the history of creation of the popular masses. This world you live in, the society that you live in, this is created by the popular masses, right? It means that the history in which new social wealth is increased and socio-historical changes and progress are made by creative activities of the popular masses. Since the beginning of human history, the popular masses have tried to conquer nature and made things needed for their existence and development with creative labor and achieved social progress by their creative activities that change the old. All of progress and changes made by humankind throughout its history are the fruition of their creative struggle. The popular masses building a new society. That is all history of human history is the popular masses' history of creation. 59. What are the characteristics of the creative movement of the popular masses? One of the characteristics of their creative movement is that it accompanies struggle, right? We cannot exercise creativity, we cannot create a new society without struggle. Their creative activities are a struggle to wipe out the old and make the new in line with their demand. Only their struggle can do away with the old and create the new. In particular, the process of replacing the old social system with a new one accompanies a fierce class struggle. The other characteristic of the creative movement is that it is a process of developing themselves into more powerful beings. The process of their creative struggle is a course in which they transform nature and society and at the same time raise their creative ability, right? So in raising our creative ability, what we're doing, we're transcending these chains and bonds that are reducing our ability to transform society and to create the new society, right? We can create new things, we can have somewhat of an ability, but collectively, through this class struggle, we can make this creative ability more fully realized and we can create the new society. 60. What does it mean that the creative stand should be maintained in the revolution and construction? As the social historical movement is the creative one of the popular masses, they should always adhere to the creative stand in their efforts to transform nature and society. Maintaining the creative stand in the revolution and construction means that all of the problems arising in the resolution and construction are solved by making the most of creativity of the popular masses and in accordance with the actual conditions of their country, right? So class struggle is a creative act. It is inherently a creative act, and that creativity is essential to achieving class struggle and creating a new society. 61. What does it mean that the social historical movement is the conscious movement of the popular masses? It means that the social historical movement is pushed by the conscious struggle of the popular masses. In other words, it is the movement through which they conduct creative activities purposefully and consciously to meet their demand for independence. 62. Why is the social historical movement called the conscious movement of the popular masses? It is because the popular masses are conscious beings with consciousness as their nature. Activities conducted by a social being as the dominator and transformer of the world are ensured by consciousness. Man conducts all his activities to understand and transform the world and himself purposefully and consciously in line with his demand and objective law. The activities the popular masses conduct to cognize and transform nature and society are just the expression of their consciousness. Therefore, the social historical movement is started and pushed by their conscious struggle, right? So earlier, Kim Il-sung talked about how, on a more individual level, consciousness and this leaving nothing to chance, right? And taking full control of our circumstances, right? As opposed to being subject to them, that is the prerequisite for creativity and independence. And now he's restating the same law, but on a collective basis as the action of the popular masses. 63. Why is human history called the history of the conscious struggle of the popular masses? Human history is the history of the conscious struggle of the popular masses. In the initial periods of human history, the people's ideological and cultural level was very low, and accordingly, spontaneity was mostly predominant in the social historical movement, right? So we had blankists, we had anarchists, we had insurrectionists, we had these spontaneous uprisings, right? And these fluctuations of power, right? But the popular masses have steadily raised their ideological, conscious, scientific, technological, and cultural levels in the long process of conquering nature and developing productivity. In the course of this, the scope of spontaneity has diminished gradually, and the scope of purposefulness and consciousness has widened in the socio-historical movement, right? So we're no longer thinking in terms of these insurrections and these quick successions of power based on domination, but rather the conscious movement of the people, which is not spontaneous, but is actually a form of collective consciousness. 64. What role does independent ideological consciousness play in the socio-historical movement? Independent ideological consciousness reflects the intrinsic demand of the popular masses. It is the consciousness of man as the master of his destiny and the will to carve out his destiny by himself. Independent ideological consciousness plays a decisive role in the social historical movement and the revolutionary movement. It means that independent ideological consciousness is a key factor that determines all the people's roles in the revolution and construction. It enables the people to fight for victory in the revolution with a correct class standpoint and display a strong will and fighting spirit. 65. What does it mean that the people's ideology should be regarded as the key factor in the revolution and construction? As the revolutionary movement is a conscious movement of the people's ideology, should always be regarded as fundamental in the revolutionary struggle and construction work. Considering the people's ideology as the key in the revolution and construction means solving all the problems by attaching paramount importance to the ideological factor and enhancing the role of ideological consciousness. To attach paramount importance to the ideological factor is to pay primary attention to the people's ideology and to make all the conditions affecting the revolution and construction ripe by relying on the ideological factor. Solving all the problems by raising the role of ideological consciousness means dealing with all the problems arising in the revolution and construction by way of stimulating the people ideologically, not in technical, business-like, or administrative way. Right? So not just implanting an ideology in the people, but bringing about a consciousness, right? And that's a different process entirely. 66. What is the position and role of a leader takes and plays in the socio-historical movement? The Juche Idea has newly delineated the position and role a leader takes and plays in the socio-historical movement, the revolutionary movement. According to it, a leader holds the absolute position and plays a decisive role in the development of history and the revolutionary struggle, right? And this may sound, oh, well, that he's just fighting an excuse to say I'm the head honcho and I get to decide everything, right? No, this is not true. Every single successful revolutionary struggle has relied on a strong leader. Every single one. 67. What does it mean that the leader takes the absolute position in the development of history and the revolutionary struggle? It means that he, as the center of the driving force of revolution and a social political organism, is in a special position that nobody can take the place of. 68. What is the absolute position a leader takes in the development of history and the revolutionary struggle? It, in a word, is the center of social political organism. The leader is the center of unity that integrates the party, the army, and the people together into a social political organism. In other words, he is the center of ideological cohesion, organizational unity, and moral obligation-based unity of the party, the army, and the people. He is the center of leadership that commands the activities of a social political organism in a unified manner. As the center controlling the living activities of an individual is the brain, the center ensuring the living activities of the social political organism that consists of a host of people is the leader, the top brain of it. Right? So in the same way that the brain controls the body, so too does the leader act as the center point of this movement. 69. What does it mean that the leader plays a decisive role in the development of history and the revolutionary struggle? It means that he plays a decisive role in carving out the destiny of the popular masses, the driving force of revolution. 70. What is the content of a decisive role played by the leader in the development of history and the revolutionary struggle? The leader establishes and develops the guiding ideology of the revolution and indicates the path of the revolution to the popular masses. He leads the revolution to victory by building up the driving force of the revolution and enhancing its role steadily. He also solves the issue of his successor correctly to make it possible to achieve ultimate victory of the revolution, right? This is a problem that we've seen in a lot of movements, is that there's some great leader, but he does not properly designate a successor. Or if he does, the successor does not actually carry it, and there's some other leader, like Khrushchev, right, who takes advantage of the circumstances and changes the path of revolution. 71. What does the Juche Idea teach in its guiding principles? The Juche Idea has explained the guiding principles to be maintained in the revolutionary movement in a comprehensive way. Its guiding principles refer to maintaining the independent stand, applying creative methods, and putting main emphasis on ideology in the revolution and construction. Right? So the Juche Idea explain the guiding principles to be maintained in a revolutionary movement in a comprehensive way. The Juche Idea represents a complete ideology for a revolutionary movement, especially that of national liberation in an oppressed nation, right? But it has a lot of universality to it. 72. What is the principle of maintaining the independent stand? The principle of maintaining the independent stand helps the popular masses take the position of the master of the revolution and construction. It requires establishing Juchean ideology, pursuing independence in politics, achieving self-support in the economy, and adhering to self-reliance in national defense, right? So I've read through almost 3/4 of this thing describing the Juche Idea. Finally, we are arriving at the idea of like independence and self-reliance, right? So the vast majority of the Juche Idea is not about this one thing that everybody tries to reduce it to. 73. What does the establishment of Juchean ideology mean? The principle of establishing Juchean ideology is the guiding principle of applying independence to the sector of ideology. Establishing Juchean ideology means ensuring that the popular masses are aware that they are the master of the revolution and construction, think about and do everything with the revolution in their country at the center, and take the standpoint and attitude of solving all the problems with their own wisdom and efforts. 74. Why does Juche have to be established in ideology? The reason why Juche has to be established in ideology is that the revolution and construction are the activities the people conduct consciously. Only when Juche is established in ideology can it be established in all the fields, including politics, the economy, and national defense. This also helps the party and people in each country carry out not only the revolution in their country, but the world revolution successfully. 75. What should be done to establish Juchean ideology? To establish Juchean ideology, the popular masses should arm themselves with independent revolutionary ideology and the lines and policies of their party. They must also be well versed in their own things. This means they should be well aware of their own country. It is important to have a high sense of national dignity and revolutionary pride in establishing Juche in ideology. It is also imperative to develop national culture and raise the cultural and technical level of the popular masses. Flunkyism and all other outdated ideologies should be rejected, right? So in establishing Juche, you are not just subject to the base line of the popular masses, right? If the popular masses have a problem, like they're addicted to opiates or marijuana or something, right? If they're all sitting around watching TV, then you don't say, oh, that's okay, that's the will of the people. No, you raise people to a higher level, right? We need to raise ourselves to a higher level, and we need to establish dignity, national dignity. 76. What does it mean to maintain independence in politics? Maintaining independence in politics is the guiding principle of translating independence into politics. Maintaining independence in politics means administering policies that defends national independence and sovereignty and the interests of the people and relies on the strength of the people. That is exactly what we did in this country in 1776, right? We achieved our national independence. 77. Why does independence have to be maintained in politics? Politics is very important in social life. Political independence is the first symbol and the foremost life of an independent sovereign state. And the revolutionary struggle is, first of all, to provide political independence for the popular masses. 78. What should be done to maintain independence in politics? To adhere to independence in politics, a government for the people should be established. Only when the popular masses have the government that serves them and become the genuine master of the state and society can they achieve political independence and lead an independent and creative life. To hold fast to independence in politics, one's own political force should be built. To this end, it is imperative to strengthen the party, the guide of the revolution, achieve unity between the leader, the party, the army, and the people, and rally all the people closely around the party and the leader with the revolutionary army as the core. It is also important to adopt one's own guiding ideology, work out lines and policies independently according to one's own decision, and put them into practice. Complete independence and equality should be exercised in foreign nations, right? And this is part of the universalism of the Juche ideology, is that it is not saying that you should just, for example, copy-paste the Juche ideology into America or into another country, but rather you should establish in your own particular circumstances, right, what you as an independent and sovereign country collectively decide makes sense for you, right? And this is a big part of the universality of Juche, is that it recognizes its own particularity as well as its own universality, right? 79. What does it mean to enhance self-support in the economy? Achieving self-support in the economy is the guiding principle of applying independence to the economic sector. Carrying out the principle of achieving self-support in the economy means building the self-supporting national economy. To build the self-supporting national economy means to construct the economy that does not rely on others but develops on its own. 80. Why does the self-supporting principle have to be maintained in the economy? The self-supporting economy makes it possible for a country to consolidate its independence, live independently, establish Juchean ideology, maintain independence in politics, achieve self-reliance in national defense, and provide the people with an affluent material and cultural life. It also helps get rid of national inequality, achieve its comprehensive development, promote economic cooperation with other countries on the principle of complete equality and mutual benefits, and provide against the economic plunder by the imperialists, right? So this is the key. Juche is about achieving the independence, creativity, and consciousness, the destiny of man, and enhancing the social life of man, and enhancing man's position in the world, right? That is at its core. Self-reliance, right, and national independence, right? These things are only a result of the condition of imperialist subjugation and resisting imperialist subjugation. They're only a consequence of these conditions. And the Juche ideology remains completely valid and relevant even without even after these conditions have been transcended. It still outlines the inherent properties of mankind and the destiny of mankind, even without the principles of national self-reliance, right? 81. What should be done to build the self-supporting national economy? The construction of the self-supporting economy necessitates adherence to the self-reliant principle in the economic construction. The economy should be developed in a diverse and comprehensive way. It is also important to provide the latest technologies for the economy and train a great number of technical personnel. Bases that produce raw materials and fuel with locally available resources should be built. And the DPRK takes science, independent scientific and technical development very seriously. 82. What does it mean to carry out the principle of adhering to self-reliance in national defense? Holding fast to self-reliance in national defense is the guiding principle of applying independence to the sector of national defense. To carry out the principle of maintaining self-reliance in national defense means to defend the country with one's own efforts. In other words, it means that each country has to build a strong military power with which to defend the country with its own efforts and solve all the problems arising in the construction of national defense and military activities in line with the interests of the people and the actual conditions of the country. 83. Why does the principle of maintaining self-reliance in national defense have to be carried out? Self-reliance in national defense is one of the main symbols for an independent sovereign state. As long as imperialism exists, the country without the self-defensive military might cannot actually be a completely sovereign state, right? There's a reason the DPRK has not been overturned by the imperialists, and that reason is because they developed their defensive capabilities. They developed anti-aircraft missile systems and eventually nuclear technology and more advanced missiles than even America. Self-defense and national defense is a military guarantee for the country's political independence and economic self-support. Only when a country adheres to the self-reliance principle in national defense can it repulse imperialist aggression and intervention, achieve political independence and economic self-support, and defend the social system and the people's safety. 84. What should be done to carry out the principle of self-reliance in national defense? It is essential to build the self-reliance armed forces to carry out the principle of self-reliance in national defense. It is also important to establish an all-people and nationwide defense system. To this end, it is necessary to turn the whole army into an army of cadres, update it, arm the entire population, and make the whole country a fortress. It is imperative to give full play to the political and ideological superiority of the revolutionary armed forces. The self-reliant defense industry should be built, and the rear should be strengthened. Right? And this is all as a way to resist imperialism. 85. What are the creative methods? The creative methods are to rely on the popular masses and do things in accordance with the actual conditions. The methods make it possible to step up the revolution and construction remarkably by giving the fullest play to the people's role, revolutionary enthusiasm, and creative initiative. 86. What does it mean to rely on the popular masses? To rely on the popular masses means to solve all of the problems arising in the revolution and construction by relying on their strength and making the most of their creativity. 87. Why do the revolution and construction have to be pushed by relying on the popular masses? It is because the popular masses are a key player in pushing the revolution and construction. It is the popular masses with an inexhaustible creative ability who play a decisive role in carrying out the revolution and construction. Only when one relies on the popular masses can one solve any problem successfully and push the revolution and construction. Can't do it without the people. 88. What is important in carrying out the revolution and construction by relying on the popular masses? An important thing in carrying out the revolution in construction by relying on the popular masses is to work out lines and policies by representing the demand and aspirations of the masses, and to make them their own affairs that they have to deal with. From the masses to the masses, learn what the people want and help them to achieve it. The other one is to rally the popular masses into a political force. It is also necessary to oppose all sorts of the old that hampers innovation. It is important to conduct mass movements on a large scale. Revolutionary methods of work should also be established. 89. What does it mean to do all things in accordance with actual conditions? It means solving all the problems creatively in accordance with the actual situation that changes and develops with the specific conditions of the country. Right? 90. Why did the revolution in construction have to be carried out in line with the actual conditions? It is because the revolution and construction are carried out in different periods and in specific environment of each country. In the revolution and construction, there is no right way that suits both all the ages and all the countries. Therefore, all the problems should always be solved creatively in keeping with the actual conditions by starting from the reality. 91. What is important in carrying out the revolution and construction in line with one's own specific situation? An important thing in pushing the revolution and construction in line with one's own actual conditions is to take subjective and objective conditions, right? Subjective being more like the ideology, development of the people, and objective being more like the actual circumstances in terms of power, forces, and, this kind of thing, right? Take subjective and objective conditions in the revolution of one's own country into full consideration and work out lines, policies, strategies, and tactics according to them. So first, you have to start with what is going on in America. You start there. You don't start with what did Lenin say. You don't start even with what is to be done. You may study these in their context. Understand the context in which these documents were written. Understand why the Russian Revolution went the way that it did. And then understand how the American Revolution is different, right? It is also important to approach the established theories properly. When approaching prepositions and formulas of all the previous theories, one should study what requirements of the times they reflected and from what premises they came, and apply them to meet one's own specific reality according to one's own characteristics. It is also necessary to explore new possibilities and ways to carry out the revolution and construction in line with the historical conditions of the time and one's own specific situation. It is important to approach others' experience critically and creatively, right? So what this means is that in order to be successful, we need to be creative. We need political innovation. When somebody says something that's different than what Marx or Lenin said, or they say something that you've never heard of before and it sounds wild and out there, or you disagree with it, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to approach it with your own constructive and creative spirit. And when you criticize it, you're supposed to build upon it, right? In criticism, you reconcile the problems within a thing, you find the truth within the thing and develop it more fully, right? And this is what we must do. And this is how we must approach each other. We need fresh ideas. We need to stop shunning people that deviate from an orthodox Marxist-Leninist line. 92. What is the principle of placing the main stress on ideology? Giving priority to the ideological transformation in political work constitutes the principle of placing the main emphasis on ideology. The principle guarantees the principles of maintaining the independent stand and applying the creative methods in the revolution and construction. 93. What does it mean to give priority to the ideological transformation? It means placing above all other work the training of people into genuine social beings by transforming their ideological consciousness. 94. Why should priority be given to the ideological transformation? Because it is essential in remolding the people into genuine social beings. The ideological transformation is also more difficult than the improvement of material life and the cultural and technical development. The ideological transformation is a serious revolution. This is really interesting, right? So anybody can go do charity work. Anybody can go feed the homeless or volunteer at a soup kitchen. But in order to transform people into more genuine, right? Into a more genuine realization, right? Genuine social beings. right? That task is much, much harder. Getting people to stand up for themselves, to fight for themselves, that task is much, much harder. 95. What does it mean to give precedence to political work? It means arming the popular masses with the party's lines and policies ahead of other work and arousing their revolutionary enthusiasm so that they wage the revolutionary struggle and construction work successfully with a high degree of consciousness and positiveness, right? That's very important. A high degree of consciousness, meaning that we're trying to account for everything, leave nothing to chance, exercise our will, right? And positiveness, meaning that we're trying to achieve things more than anything. 96. Why does precedence have to be given to political work? It is because political work is an indispensable need for successfully pushing the revolution and construction. As the revolution and construction are carried out by people, their success depends on how work among people is conducted. Work among people is, in essence, political work and work with people's ideology. So, priority should be given to political work that stimulates the people's ideology in order to carry out the revolution and construction successfully. 97. What is important in applying the principle of giving precedence to political work? It is important to properly combine the administrative, technical, and economic affairs of political work while giving precedence to it. Main emphasis should be placed on political and moral incentives, and material incentives should be combined with them properly, right? So not only do we know that the revolution is going to be in our benefit, we know that it is the right thing. This is especially true in America, where the horrors of imperialism are very real. We cannot exclusively emphasize the people's self-interest, nor can we exclusively emphasize the morality, but we must combine them in our political work. Political work should be relied on scientific and revolutionary methods. It should be conducted by way of persuasion and education in diverse forms and methods. It should also be conducted by the popular masses themselves. Teach the people to teach, right? It should be closely combined with revolutionary practice. 98. What is the historic position of the Juche idea? Again, this is where it finds universality by defining its own historical era. The Juche idea is a perfect revolutionary idea that has reached the highest stage in the development of revolutionary ideas. Fundamentally different from other previous philosophies, the Juche idea is based on the man-centered philosophical principle and shows the most correct way for carving out man's destiny. It explains all the contents of the revolutionary outlook on the world comprehensively and perfectly. It is a great idea that represents the present age and the whole historical period. It gives perfect answers to all the problems arising in revolutionary practice at present when the popular masses are fighting for national liberation and class and human emancipation after emerging as the master of history and their destiny. It also deals with the issues of future society where independence of the popular masses will have been fully provided throughout the world. So Juche not only provides the tools to revolutionize society and create a society without class limitations, without these limitations, it also provides a future for what a socialist society wants to achieve. And it does this by defining the essential characteristics of man and his position in the world. 99. How have the study and dissemination of the Juche idea been conducted over the world? Teachers and students at a teacher training college in Mali formed a group for studying Comrade Kim Il-sung's works, the first Juche idea study group in the world, on April Juche 58, that's 1969. Since then, national and regional organizations for studying the Juche idea had been formed throughout the world. Against this background, the International Institute of the Juche idea was inaugurated in April Juche 67, 1978. At present, there are more than 1,000 study groups and 27 national committees in some 110 countries, as well as 4 regional organizations in 4 continents. This was written in 2012, by the way. The International Institute of the Juche idea has a pyramid-type system for studying and disseminating the idea. Activities for studying and disseminating the Juche idea have been conducted worldwide on the basis of the well-functioning system. The board of the International Institute of the Juche Idea decided at the 13th enlarged meeting of its executive committee in April, Juche 100, 2011, to hold the World Conference on the Juche Idea in Pyongyang, the DPRK, home to the Juche Idea, in commemoration of the Day of the Sun, April 15th, in Juche 101, 2012, to mark the 100th birthday of Kim Il-sung. 100. What is the significance of the World Conference on the Juche Idea? The World Conference on the Juche Idea will contribute greatly to commemorating the 100th birthday of President Kim Il-sung, who had performed brilliant exploits in the history of human thought by establishing the immortal Juche Idea as a great event in human history and a great political festival. It will be a historic occasion that extols the great exploits President Kim Il-sung had performed in the Korean Revolution and the cause of making the world independent under the banner of the Juche Idea, and will prove that the validity and vitality of the Juche Idea are being inherited by Songun politics developed and enriched by leader Kim Jong-il. It will be of great help to invigorating the activities of the Juche Idea study organizations and the followers throughout the world, and stimulating the study and disseminating of the idea. And with that, folks, I have just read you a 10,000 word document. I've guided you along. I have educated you on some of the history of Korea, right? The Korean War, right? I have educated you on some of the misconceptions about the Juche Idea, and now with this document, I have disseminated the contents of the idea, at least in outline, right? And after watching this whole video, I think that you can understand the importance of the Juche Idea as a shining beacon for the destiny of mankind, as well as its meaning for the national independence of colonized nations, right? So I think that it's very important for us to abide by the principle of no investigation, no right to speak. You can go on Wikipedia and you can go read, this is what the Juche ideology is, right? But Wikipedia does not accurately describe the essentials of the Juche Idea, instead reducing it to only one of its principles, which is actually one of its least universal principles, the need for self-reliance. Rather, Juche is an entire philosophical system which claims to have universality, which I think it does, right? Which I think it does, and I would say it's very important for us all to study the Juche Idea and uphold its importance, not just for the Korean people, but for all peoples seeking independence in this world, right? So, with that, I'm going to end my video, my stream, right? And I'm going to read the thing that I always read. So if you like this video, if you like this stream, well, don't share the stream because it's about to end, but go ahead and share this video. My stream schedule, I stream Thursday nights at 8:30 p.m. CST, Sunday nights at 8:30 p.m. CST. If you want to see me in higher quality, donate to my Cash App 44100HZ. If you want to support my organization, CPI, which is doing lots of other great educational and journalistic work, it is an anti-imperialist think tank which is developing new and creative ideas designed for the particular American context. Donate to CPI so that they can organize a conference in Chicago that is August 6th at the Hyatt Regency in Deerfield, Illinois. Donate to CPI Events, Cash App, CPI Events. This event will be featuring Garland Nixon, Tara Reid, Dan Kovalik, Nick Brana of the People's Party, Dus James, and I will not be presenting, but I will be there. And finally, if you really like what we're doing here, consider joining CPI. That is cpiusa.org. And with that, I will play you an outro. So thanks for watching.